Welcome my friends to another deep analytical look at one of gaming's greatest soundtracks. Assassin's Creed 2's music was composed by Jesper Kyd, also known for his previous entry in the series and also the Hitman franchise. Ubisoft decided to hire Kyd in the first place due to his way of creating emotion through atmosphere. I've noticed in much of his music that he'll often use the low end of a song to produce a mood, and then the middle to high end usually contains the melody, which fits the mood or sometimes even contrasts it. For Assassin's Creed 2, at Kyd's disposal was a 35-piece orchestra and a 13-piece choir. The choir plays a major role in the game as the setting, the Renaissance era, has historically been known as the birth of opera. The lessons we'll uncover in Dreams of Venice are: there is always tension before release. Kyd is excellent at crafting a tense and nervous atmosphere. As you'll see in Dreams of Venice, this will result in a beautiful release at the end of the song. Using percussion is not always the best option. Often used as rhythm or transition instrument, the percussion, when removed, has to be represented in some fashion. Seek a lead voice to guide the listener. Without something to attach to, the music would seem meandering and lost. Without further ado, let's check out this amazing song. You'll begin to see as we uncover this piece how Jesper Kyd uses layers of instruments to build up the tension. It makes this final payoff with the strings at the end that much worth it. The song begins at a slow and crawling 75 beats per minute. And what I find interesting is that this organ and synthpad duo stay persistent throughout the entire song. It is noticeable, of course, but then it seems to meld in with the other elements of the song. Fortunately, the composer didn't decide to change key, so the single note being held can remain consistent. Let's take a quick look at the instruments. The synthpad and organ give a nice solid foundation that doesn't draw too much attention to itself. You can see that over the course of the song it does add additional notes, such as here and here, to increase the tension within the song. Perhaps the two intriguing aspects of the song are the two vocals, the female soprano and the male baritone. Both of them solo in their own respective sections and give off different moods. And here's the baritone. The soprano female voice is more beautiful and serene, and it reminds me of the waters of Venice. The baritone, on the other hand, is dark and broody, perhaps the city streets of Venice. The piccolo is only used at the beginning and end of the song, and you can see here that there's only one single timpani note, which is surprising given that this is the only percussion in the entire song. During this crucial transition from section 1 to 2, you can see that it could have been easy to add in a rolling timpani or a crash, but the lack of them is a testament to how skilled Kyd is in his craft. Besides the synth pad and organ, the bass and cello pizzicato provide the low-end presence the song needs. Giving the job to the lowest of the strings family was a good move in my eyes, due to the mood Kyd wanted to create. Next, the harp is used pretty traditionally here, only playing the short melodic moments. The saz is an interesting instrument, and it is traditionally a Turkish guitar, but I think the composer did a great job of marrying the traditional music at the time with this more video game type of sound with how the saz is played. And almost right after the saz is introduced, we have the piano and celeste, and it's played in the right ear to serve as the counterpoint to the saz. Finally, the high strings serve as a tension builder during the section 1C. And the mid strings double what the soprano vocal melody during this following section 2. Think of this introduction as a foreshadow for things to come. The soprano vocal melody here will later be expanded upon in section 2 at the end of the song. The main difference you'll see between these two sections is how the main vocal melody here is almost muffled in a way. Now we achieve this by first drowning it in reverb. You can see in the second tenor vocal line that we have 2 reverbs and I have it routed to 2 more. So by applying these 4 reverbs, it really places the vocals in a distant place. You can also achieve this by using a cutoff filter, by cutting off the high end. Both of these factors will later disappear when you get to the second section. Let's look at the melody line here. As in many melodious pieces of music, repetition is the key to crafting a memorable melody. Here, there are numerous places where the soprano singer repeats a note, predominantly the A note. Of course, the key here is in D Dorian, but it's quite impressive how Jesper Kyd created such a beautiful melody with only these 5 notes of that key. And of course, there's always a variation, usually at the second part when it repeats. Now the piccolo is quite oddly played here. It is not exactly in line with what the soprano vocals are doing, but I think they help bring the piece a bit forward in the mix as the piccolo isn't too drowned out in reverb. Before we move on, note also the additional notes being played in the synth pad and organ. These notes create tension, which will be resolved in the following section. Now let me play the entire section. For section 1, you can see that the synth pad will continue on these low D and A notes, and support the rest of the piece from there. Later on, much like the introduction, more notes are included for the build-up of tension. Now for the baritone vocals. It was difficult to find a suitable plugin that replicated actual singing with lyrics. I think what I did here worked well enough, short of recording my own voice. You'll notice here that the melody itself is quite monotone compared to the soprano line. It sounds much like a Gregorian chant, which no doubt this song was taken influence from. Also, unlike the soprano melody, is how random the baritone vocals seem to be. You might be able to pick up on a similar elements here and there, but I like the way the vocals seem to counter against what we just heard before. One last thing on these vocals is that they mostly sing the E in the Dorian D scale, which represents the second scale degree. The second degree is quite dissonant against the tonic notes, which is why you get this sort of tension buildup. For the bass and cello pizzicato sections, they really give the song some propellant movement forward. And they actually prevent the song from becoming too dark. If you take them out, take a listen for yourself. Adding them back in kind of brings a sneaking vibe, especially when paired with the harp. Speaking of the harp, I love the way it's delicately played here, and highlights the pizzicato parts, rather than playing them under everything. As we move into section 1B, both the saz instrument and the piano celeste are introduced. The notes the saz plays are perhaps the trickiest part of recreating the song. The intervals it seems to play are incredibly varied, and the two voices seem to act as counterpoints to each other. This is a very fascinating way of scoring, and I love the medieval vibes it gives to the song. Although fortunately for me, this pattern repeats itself mostly the same throughout most of the song. The piano and celeste combination was an excellent move. It contrasts the saz by not only sounding washed out and EQ'd like the beginning soprano vocals, it is also panned all the way to the right. The rhythm is also different as well. Notice the voicings of this pattern in particular. Some of the voices move in contrary motion, such as this point, and others move together, such as here. Some use two voices, and some use three. For such a small part of the song, Kyd put some major work in this instrument. Let's play the two together and see if you can pick them out. As we move into section 1C, this part of the song conveys a feeling of nervous anticipation that is hard to describe. I think the way Kyd achieves this is by sort of closing in on the song on both ends of the frequency spectrum. What I mean by this is that in the low end, particularly in the synth pattern organ, Kyd adds these additional notes that we mentioned before that expand on the D and A. For the high end and the strings, which mostly play on this A, it's unwavering in its volume. With both of these ends coming down on the baritone vocals, this presents a fantastic opportunity for the release in the section 2. Let's play some of the section here. As is well known in music, a release without tension buildup will not have the same impact. With the incredible amount of tension in the previous section, section 2 sounds all the more glorious and majestic as we return back to the soprano vocals. The vocals are more opened up and joined by the mid-strings, which mostly comprise of violas and a single violin. I find it interesting how the song doesn't seem to be transitioning from one section to another, as it keeps the synth pad the same, the bass and cello pizzicato, the saz and piano, and the high strings all stay constant. The mid strings use third intervals between the third and the fifth, mostly, which often confuses the listener on whether the chord is major or minor. Occasionally it does play these triad chords, which establishes a D minor tone. Note the different string patches that I used here. Using 3 here, in this case, gives a lush and vibrant sound, and as I cycle through these string patterns, this third one plays the melody line up top, which I feel was emphasized in the original song. Now, to conclude out the song, the piccolo from the intro returns, and it doubles what the soprano vocal melody is doing. The vibrato for the piccolo really breathes some life and character to the piece, which is pretty much the icing on top of the cake at this point. Now for the full song playthrough. Take note in the introduction how the piccolo seems to be almost out of alignment with the soprano vocals. In section 1, how each subsection 1A, 1B, 1C adds additional tension with a new instrument. And finally in section 2, the powerful nature of doubling to bring out the melody line. This is a premier example of how to encapsulate an atmosphere within a game. When I think of Venice, lovely streams of water are everywhere. Bell towers are ringing and the citizens are wearing elaborate dresses. However, the song implies that there is something deeper beneath the surface. The lower end of the song seeks to remind the player and listener that the city life is not perfect by any means, and that there is still oppression clearly visible. How the song seems to capture both extremes shows the kind of composer Jesper Kyd is. Thank you, as ever, for watching this analysis. I deeply enjoy recreating these amazing songs, and the ability to show you the tips and tricks the great composers of the past have put into their songs. Thanks again, and have a pleasing day.